She paid for a stranger's groceries. The secret camera caught everything. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store hummed faintly above the rows of produce, casting a sterile glow across the polished floor. Claire Morgan pushed her cart slowly, her list folded in her pocket but barely checked. She was in her mid-30s, auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, a simple navy coat wrapped tight against the early March chill. Her eyes darted between prices, calculating every item with the kind of precision born not from habit, but from necessity. Life had been a constant balancing act since her husband had walked out 3 years ago, leaving her with rent, bills, and a 7-year-old daughter whose smile was worth every sacrifice. She paused at the bread aisle, comparing store-brand wheat against a loaf that was 50 cents more expensive, but softer, fresher. Her daughter Emily loved that brand. Claire put the pricier one in her cart anyway, whispering, "Just this once," as if apologizing to her own budget. 2 aisles over, a man struggled with his own cart. He was tall, mid-40s, dressed in an old brown jacket that had seen better days. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a gallon of milk, then pulled it back, checking the price and sighing before returning it to the shelf. His name was Daniel Hart. Most of the town knew him only as the quiet man who lived alone near the edge of Maple Street. A veteran of the Coast Guard, he carried himself with a kind of rugged dignity, though years of solitude and disappointment had carved deep lines into his face. Their paths intersected at Checkout Lane 7. Claire stood behind Daniel, her cart half full, while his contained little more than a box of cereal, a bag of rice, and 2 apples. He pulled out his wallet slowly, counted a few crumpled bills, and glanced up at the screen as the cashier rang up the total. His shoulders stiffened when the number appeared. He didn't have enough. The cashier, a teenager named Kayla with bubblegum pink nails, looked at him with a mixture of impatience and sympathy. "Sir, it's $22.75. Daniel swallowed, sliding his hand over the bills again. I only have 18. He started to put back the apples, then the cereal, his jaw tightening as if each item weighed more than just food. Claire's eyes softened. She didn't know this man, not really, but something about the quiet desperation in his movements struck her. Without letting herself overthink, she reached into her purse, pulled out her debit card, and slid it across the counter. "I'll cover the rest," she said simply. Daniel turned, startled. "No, you don't have to." "It's fine," Claire interrupted, her voice steady but gentle. "Everyone needs a hand sometimes." His lips parted as if to argue, but the words died. His eyes, a stormy gray, searched hers for any trace of pity, but found none. Only kindness. Slowly, he nodded. "Thank you," he murmured, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. Kayla swiped the card, the register beeped, and the groceries were bagged. Daniel picked them up carefully, as if they were fragile treasures. He gave Claire one last look, a mix of gratitude and bewilderment, then walked out into the cold evening. Claire exhaled, almost embarrassed by her own impulse. She hadn't thought about cameras, about being seen. She just couldn't stand watching someone else lose pieces of dignity for the sake of a few dollars. What Claire didn't know was that a security camera above Checkout Lane 7 had captured the entire exchange. Later that night, when the store manager reviewed footage while investigating a separate complaint, he paused at the scene. The kindness was striking, unexpected, and real. Within 24 hours, the clip had been shared among employees. By the end of the week, it would spread beyond the store, beyond the town, pulling Claire and Daniel into a storm neither of them could have predicted. Back at her apartment, Claire placed the bread and milk on the counter, while Emily chattered about her school day. The little girl's laughter filled the small kitchen, and Claire smiled despite the exhaustion tugging at her bones. Across town, in a dimly lit living room with peeling wallpaper, Daniel unpacked his sparse groceries onto an old wooden table. He sat down heavily, staring at the bag of rice as though it symbolized something larger. His chest ached, not from hunger, but from the memory of a stranger's simple act. For the first time in years, he whispered aloud, "May the people still care." He didn't know yet how much that single moment would change his life. And neither did Claire. The next morning, Claire hurried through her routine, brushing Emily's hair while packing a lunchbox with peanut butter sandwiches and apple slices. She had almost forgotten the grocery store incident, chalking it up to just another day of making small sacrifices for someone else. But by the time she dropped Emily off at school and checked her phone during her break at work, the notifications made her pause. Her friend had tagged her in a video. Claire frowned, clicked, and suddenly, there it was, grainy footage from checkout lane 7. Her, standing behind a tall man in a worn jacket, the pause at the register, her hand sliding the card across. The caption read, "Woman steps up to help a stranger at Maple Street Market." It had already been shared hundreds of times. Comments poured in. "Faith in humanity restored. Angels walk among us. This made me cry." Claire's stomach twisted. She hadn't asked for attention. She'd only wanted to help quietly. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel's phone buzzed. He hadn't expected anyone to call, but it was his neighbor, a retired nurse who often checked in on him. "You're on Facebook," she laughed, her voice warm. "You and some lady at the grocery store. You're famous now." Daniel groaned, but curiosity pulled him to open his laptop. Sure enough, the clip was everywhere. People praised Claire, but his own face was there too, lined and weary, a silent portrait of a man who'd nearly gone hungry. He closed the laptop with a snap, unsettled. By evening, the local news station called Claire. They wanted an interview. She hesitated, her instinct telling her to say no. But Emily overheard and tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, you should. People need to know being nice matters." Claire's heart softened. Maybe her daughter was right. Maybe it wasn't about her. Maybe it was about reminding people that kindness still existed. The interview aired the next night. Claire sat at her small kitchen table, nervously answering questions while Emily clung to her arm. She spoke simply. "I didn't think twice. He needed help, and I could do it. We all have moments when we can step in, even in small ways." The anchor smiled, the clip ended, and within hours it spread further. Strangers sent messages of gratitude, some sharing their own stories of quiet generosity. But Daniel didn't watch the interview. He avoided the television entirely, embarrassed by the sudden exposure. He didn't like being pitied, didn't like the idea of people analyzing his struggle with money. Yet as days passed, something unexpected happened. An envelope arrived at his door, slipped into his mailbox with no return address. Inside was a gift card to the same grocery store, along with a note that said, "Someone helped me once, and I'm paying it forward." Daniel sat at his kitchen table, staring at it for a long time. His throat tightened. He hadn't felt this kind of community in years. Claire's life shifted too. People recognized her at the gas station, at the library, even at Emily's school. Most just smiled, some thanked her outright. Yet the sudden attention unsettled her. She didn't want to be a hero. She wanted to pay her bills, raise her daughter, and sleep through the night without worry. She began to wonder about Daniel. Was he all right with all this? Did he resent the spotlight? Their paths crossed again 2 weeks later. Claire was leaving the grocery store with Emily when she saw him near the parking lot, loading a few bags into the trunk of his old sedan. His movements were slower than she remembered, as if each step carried weight. She almost kept walking, but Emily spotted him first. "Mom, it's him," she waved. Daniel looked up, startled. For a moment, his guarded expression returned, the look of a man used to walls. But then he saw Claire, and the tension eased. "Hello," he said quietly. Claire approached, unsure. "I hope you're not upset about the video." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't want attention, but it's done more good than harm, I guess. People have been kinder lately. More neighbors talking to me. Someone even left me soup last week." His voice cracked with a hint of disbelief. Emily grinned, tugging on Claire's hand. "See, Mom? Kindness spreads." Claire smiled faintly, realizing her daughter understood more than she gave her credit for. Before they parted, Daniel surprised her. "Would you maybe have coffee sometime? I'd like to say thank you properly, without cameras." Claire hesitated, then nodded. "I think I'd like that." Neither of them realized the ripple that single cup of coffee would create, not just for themselves, but for an entire town that had begun to believe again in the quiet power of helping one another. The cafe on Main Street smelled of roasted beans and fresh pastries, a place where locals lingered on rainy afternoons. Claire sat at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, waiting. She wasn't sure why she'd agreed to meet, only that something about Daniel's quiet dignity had stayed with her. The bell above the door chimed, and there he was, tall, shoulders slightly hunched, jacket damp from the drizzle outside. He spotted her and hesitated before making his way over. "Thanks for coming," he said as he sat down. His voice was low, edged with the gravel of someone who'd spent years carrying unspoken weight. "Thanks for asking," Claire replied, managing a small smile. For a moment, silence settled between them, awkward but not unfriendly. Then Daniel spoke. "I never meant for that day to become a spectacle. I've lived my life quietly. Suddenly, people know my face. I don't know how to feel about that." Claire nodded. "I understand. I didn't want attention either. I just wanted to help." She paused, then added softly, "But maybe it's not about us. Maybe it's about what the story gave people, a little hope." Daniel studied her, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Hope's a rare currency these days." He stirred his coffee, as if searching for the right words. "Truth is, that day, I wasn't just short on money. I was short on reasons to keep going." Claire blinked, caught off guard by his candor. "But then you stepped in. You didn't just buy groceries. You reminded me I still mattered." Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected her small act to carry such weight. "You do matter," she said firmly. "You've lived through things most people can't imagine. That has value." Their conversation stretched, moving from heavy truths to lighter moments. Daniel spoke of his years in the Coast Guard, of storms at sea, and the camaraderie of men who trusted each other with their lives. Claire shared stories of Emily, her boundless curiosity, her obsession with building forts out of blankets and chairs. Laughter broke the heaviness, easing them into a rhythm neither had anticipated. As they left the cafe, the drizzle had turned to steady rain. Claire offered him a ride, but he shook his head. "I'll walk. It clears my mind." He gave her a small nod, almost a bow of gratitude, then disappeared into the rain-soaked street. Claire stood watching him, strangely certain their paths were far from finished. The weeks that followed confirmed it. The story of their encounter continued to ripple outward. A local church started a food drive inspired by the clip. Students at Emily's school organized a kindness week. Small businesses offered discounts to veterans and single parents. The town, once divided by the quiet strains of modern life, seemed to lean closer together. But with attention, came pressure. Claire's boss pulled her aside. "I hope you realize how this looks. Positive press is good, but don't let it distract you. You're already behind on reports." She bit back frustration, realizing that not everyone saw kindness as currency. And Daniel found himself overwhelmed too. Strangers approached him in the grocery store, pressing cash into his hand, offering meals, calling him a symbol. He didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted dignity. One evening, Claire found herself knocking on his door. The small house near Maple Street was tidy but worn, the porch light flickering. Daniel opened the door, surprise flickering across his face. "Claire, is everything all right?" "I should ask you the same," she said. "Are you okay with all this?" He sighed, leaning against the frame. "I don't know. I'm grateful, but it feels strange. I didn't earn any of this." She stepped closer, her voice steady. "You didn't earn hardship either. Life gave you that without asking. Maybe this is life giving something back." Daniel held her gaze, the storm in his eyes softening. "Maybe." He hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Would you like to come in?" Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar. A few framed photos lined the mantel. Daniel in uniform, younger and stronger, his arm around fellow sailors. Another photo of his parents, now gone. The walls were bare otherwise, the kind of emptiness that comes from years of expecting no visitors. Claire sat at the table while Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee. They spoke again, deeper this time, about choices, about loss, about the way a single moment can change the trajectory of a life. Claire realized she wasn't just helping him, he was reminding her too that resilience mattered, that even in her own exhaustion, there was strength left to give. When she finally left, the rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh, like the world had been rinsed clean. Daniel stood at the porch, watching her walk to her car, and for the first time in years, a quiet hope stirred in his chest. Spring arrived slowly in the small town, bringing with it longer days, softer air, and a sense of renewal that touched even the corners of lives that had grown accustomed to routine. Claire noticed it first in Emily, who had started asking more questions about kindness. "If helping one person can change so much, Mom," she said one morning while tying her sneakers, "what happens if we all help each other?" Claire smiled, humbled by her daughter's simple wisdom. Daniel noticed it too, not in words, but in gestures. Neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years waved when he walked by. Someone shoveled his walkway without being asked. An old friend from the service reached out after seeing his face online. These small moments stitched together a fabric of community he had once believed was lost. But through it all, the center of that fabric was Claire, the woman who had slid her card across a grocery counter and unknowingly rewoven the trajectory of his days. Their friendship deepened quietly. Sunday afternoons turned into shared meals, Claire cooking casseroles, while Daniel brought stories that made Emily giggle. Sometimes he fixed small things around her apartment, the squeaky door, the leaky faucet, while Emily hovered nearby, eager to learn. Claire watched the bond between them grow with a mixture of gratitude and caution, aware of how fragile life's turns could be. But not everyone viewed their connection kindly. Claire's boss began to whisper about her focus, hinting that her sudden visibility made her a distraction. Daniel, too, faced murmurs. Some people questioned whether he deserved the outpouring of help, whether he was truly a hero or simply lucky. The noise grew, threatening to drown out the simple truth of what had begun between them. Then came the night that changed everything. Claire was walking home from work, her mind heavy with deadlines and doubt, when she noticed flashing lights near Maple Street. Instinct quickened her steps until she saw what had happened. Daniel's old sedan had broken down at an intersection, blocking traffic. Drivers honked impatiently, some shouting out their windows. Daniel stood by the hood, sweat on his brow, trying to wave them past. Without hesitation, Claire stepped into the street. "Need a hand?" she called. He looked up, relief washing over his face. Together they pushed the car out of the way, Claire's coat flapping in the cold night air until it rested safely near the curb. By then, a small crowd had gathered, people recognizing them both. Phones came out, cameras recorded. But Claire ignored it all, focusing only on Daniel's grateful nod. Later that week, a new clip went viral, not of a single act of kindness, but of two people working together, side by side, refusing to let circumstance define them. The headline read, "The grocery store woman and the veteran, still proving kindness matters." This time, neither of them shied away from the attention. Claire agreed to speak at a local community event about empathy. Daniel, hesitant at first, stood beside her. He spoke of dignity, of how a stranger's kindness had reminded him he wasn't invisible. The audience rose in applause, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. The changes that followed weren't dramatic, but steady. The town's food bank expanded, funded by donations inspired by their story. Schools added lessons on empathy. Neighbors organized monthly gatherings where people shared meals and stories. The ripples spread beyond the town, reaching nearby communities. And through it all, Claire and Daniel continued to meet, their bond deepening into something unspoken yet undeniable. Months later, on a summer evening, Claire stood on her balcony watching Emily and Daniel plant flowers in pots along the railing. Laughter drifted upward, carried on warm air. Daniel looked up, caught her gaze, and for a moment, everything stilled. There was no camera, no crowd, no headline. Just two lives that had collided by chance and reshaped each other with something as simple as compassion. As the sun dipped low, Emily clapped her hands. "Look!" she exclaimed, pointing to the blossoms already opening. Claire felt a lump rise in her throat. Life, like those flowers, sometimes bloomed from the smallest seeds. A loaf of bread, a grocery line, a stranger's quiet decision. She had no doubt that what started as a single act would continue to grow, not just in her life or Daniel's, but in every person who had seen, remembered, and chosen to pass it on. In the end, the cameras would move on, the headlines would fade, but the story would remain, not in archives or feeds, but in the way people treated each other in the grocery aisles, on the sidewalks, in the quiet spaces of everyday life. Claire knew now that kindness wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing others. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. And so a simple act in a grocery store reminded an entire town, and maybe the world, that kindness doesn't just change one moment, it can change lives. Sometimes the smallest gesture becomes the spark that lights 1,000 more.